Good morning. Welcome to day 23 of Pursuing Your Personal Pentecost. As we left off yesterday, Paul had been arrested, was facing trials, going through a lot of back and forth. The Spirit had given him wisdom to mention some things that help kind of get him, buy him some time, so to speak. When we get into 23, we have these Sadducees and Pharisees that are arguing back and forth. And Paul realizes this. It says, Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, and he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. And when he had said this, decision arose between the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. So Paul basically figured out a way to divide this court and get them arguing amongst themselves. And when we drop down a little bit further, it says the next night the Lord stood by him, meaning Paul, and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified of me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness in Rome. So the Lord's given him a promise that he's going to do the same thing in Rome that he did in Jerusalem. And right after this, the very next verse, it says, When it was day, some of the Jews band together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 42 who had formed this conspiracy. Okay, and so word of this gets out to Paul's, I believe it was his sister-in-law, if I remember correctly. But she sends her son, this lady sends her son to tell these leaders of what's happening. That there's these 42 guys that have, taken an oath to fast until Paul's dead. But the Lord had already given Paul a promise that he was going to Rome. And so many times when we get a promise from the Lord, but then opposition seems to come, we forget the promise. A perfect example of this was the disciples when Jesus and then told them to get in the boat and go to the other side. Okay, so Jesus has already said we're going to the other side. And so he took a nap. He's sleeping in the boat when the storms and the waves and everything come, and the disciples start freaking out. And they wake him up, Lord, do you not care that we're going to perish? And Jesus jumps up, calms the storm, and they're automatically translated to the other side. But what they forgot was Jesus already said we're going over to the other side. If they'd have just remembered that, they'd understood not to panic during the tumultuous times or the storm, to just trust that God was with them. And that, I think that's the whole lesson here in chapter 23, is to remember if God's for us, who can be against us? There's no one can come against us. Same with me. When I had my prophecy to ride a champion, it took 2.5 years for that champion to come to fruition. But there was a time, about 6 months before it happened, that I lost sight. I lost sight of the prophecy, and it took my wife reminding me, of what that prophecy said. And, she asked me, she said, "What did the Lord say?" And I said, "Well, the Lord said I'll ride a champion." And I was at this point where I felt like I was letting God down because, I was riding winners every day, but I wasn't riding what I would consider champion quality horses. I mean, in fact, the prophecy involved me winning the Derby. So, I did not have a Derby horse, so I felt like I was letting God down. And she reminded me that, God said I would ride a champion. And that's all I needed to focus on. If God said it, then he's going to do it. And I think so many times in our lives we lose sight. It's real easy for life to get caught up in the things of life and let that lose sight of what God's promises says. If he says, I'm always with you, I will never leave you nor forsake you. We have to remember those kind of things during the storms. That's what'll get us through the storms, is by listening, knowing His Word, knowing His promises that will sustain us through hard times. You know, He tells us in Matthew 28, you know, cast your burdens upon me. Let me carry the load. Let me carry the burden. You know, for my yoke is easy. Put my yoke on you. You know, Jesus doesn't have any worries. He's not worried about anything. You know, if you read the end of the book, we win. Plain and simple. So don't let the worries of life get you stressed down and beat down, and get your focus off of what, you know, God's called you to do. If God's for us, who can be against us? That's the main thing I believe to remember from this, because Paul was not worried, you know, and when God was for him, He made a way. You know, He used this young man that overheard what was going on, and he got it to the leader, who got it to the top guy, the top council that was in charge of this, and then they were able to keep Paul from being torn to pieces by this mob of 42 religious people who were fasting and wasn't going to quit fasting until they killed Paul. I mean, how demented does your mind have to be to enter a fast that doesn't stop until you kill somebody? I mean, that just shows how religion can overtake somebody and just completely derail them from the things of God. But just remember, if God be for you, who can be against you? And we'll see you tomorrow morning.